Next up, we're going to wrestle with the question, how private can a stablecoin be? Simple enough question, but the answer is really complicated. Our next three panelists, Matthew Green, computer science professor at Johns Hopkins University, Ian Miers, computer science professor at the University of Maryland, and Peter Van Valkenburgh, executive director of Coin Center, have agreed to spend the next 30 minutes tackling this extremely thorny question.
Thanks, Mike. So we are privileged for the next 30 minutes to talk to two of the pioneers of what Kaylee just described as fancy privacy. I said that. Oh, I'm sorry. No, that was good. Yeah. So fancy privacy.
Is actually the title of a lecture I give in my crypto class.
Oh, it's perfect. See, you're prescient. Matt Green and Ian Miers are cryptographers. They're professors. Actually, this is like cool. This is a local DC great academic resume hit, right? Like,
let's go rock climbing afterwards.
And I'm Peter Van Valkenburgh. I'm the executive director of Coin Center. I'm at a nonprofit. We're a civil liberties organization, and that's my chief interest in this space. Is privacy is also a fundamental human right, I believe, and something that we should protect as open societies, that we shouldn't just assume that people, don't have rights to keep certain things that are intimate to themselves. So what I want to do is, the title of this panel is How Private Can a Stablecoin Be? And we could think of that as a technical question. And we have two of the best people to answer that from a technical perspective. But what I'm hoping we discuss in this panel is that ultimately the technical gives way to the regulatory and the legal and the institutional, and how we run into some really bad and pernicious incentives and we get stuck in sort of cycles. But I want to start with both of you pioneered fancy privacy in crypto, as in cryptocurrency rather than cryptography. So tell me about what was wrong with Bitcoin.
I think at this point, I hope we've gotten the message across that Bitcoin is not very private. And it's the same reason that most crypto is not very private, right? Like Bitcoin was an amazing idea. The idea is that you could have many, many people all verify each other's transactions. And if you have enough people who are honest, then nobody can do anything bad. But the downside is everybody needs to verify everybody's transactions. And that means since everyone in Bitcoin is a volunteer, we have to share that transaction data with the world. And it was such a good solution to the problem at the time. Nobody was upset about it. But even Satoshi back in, I think, 2009, 2010, started to realize, like, I've created this monster, right? There's no privacy whatsoever for transactions. Everything we've tried doesn't work to fix it. And he started using terms like zero knowledge. How do we use technology to make this better? So
Ian, what did you do?
Right, so the soundbite is Bitcoin and most other cryptocurrencies are Twitter for your bank account. So I was Matt's grad student at the time, and the question was, how do you solve this? And so the first thing Matt and I worked out was, how do you use zero knowledge proofs to build privacy preserving transactions? That's the thing that ended up being Zcash, the techniques underlying Tornado Cash. For the FBI in the room, no, we didn't actually do that. That was other people.
They use the same libraries, right?
Some of them, yes. Not ones we
actually
wrote.
wanted it to be in Bitcoin, not Zcash.
Yeah, originally it was meant to be in Bitcoin, and the math was a bit too complicated. The Bitcoin developers didn't want to do it, so you start having to spin up your own cryptocurrencies.
It's interesting, actually, already hitting the institutional barriers. It was meant to be on Bitcoin. Why didn't it just end up in Bitcoin? And then Bitcoin would have been private, and this conference would be very different, right?
Yeah, there'd only be meat.
No, but serious question. Why not? Why didn't it end up in Bitcoin for those who don't know the history?
They had technical reasons, and they were good ones, right? Like the math is pretty nuts, and there, actually were bugs later on, and they had really good arguments about how big transactions would get and how slow Bitcoin would get. It was like a very, very good argument, and they were right. But the cool thing about cryptocurrency is like when somebody gives you a good reason not to do a thing, you can just do the thing. And so we just did the thing. We just called it Zcash.
Yeah, and the other thing is that adding privacy to your cryptocurrency even then was scary for people because it runs more risks, right? So there was a very minority of folks who were like, no, you don't want to add privacy. That'll get this entire thing shut down.
But it's interesting because I think even though you came up with something arguably better, at least on this one dimension of privacy, Bitcoin's still there and it actually kind of is still more, widely used, more successful. So they might have been right that this was premature to implement and things like this. And it might be great that you can just go out and do things, but we're still sort of anchored to the original thing. And the original thing has these biases inherent in it that mean that you have effectively no privacy when you use cryptocurrencies, unless you go out of your way to use some of these special ones that might be harder to find or might even be banned or outlawed by.
Don't people use Bitcoin through ETFs now? Like, didn't we solve that problem? No.
Well, that's another interesting institutional question, is these things get captured and do they become things that their original creators never intended them to be? And are we just actually just finding new ways to reinvent the old systems that make this whole sort of like high-minded, oh, we're gonna decentralize finance, we're gonna restore agency and privacy to human financial dealings actually just seem kind of empty?
Yeah, I mean, I think Bitcoin at the time wanted to be a payment system. And the narrative has mostly shifted to being it's an asset you want to hold because it's digital gold or however the story goes. And there, privacy is not as significant. But when you start seeing people trying to do payments, a la stablecoins, we're back to these same issues where everybody knows that you can't have it be Twitter for your bank account and public to everybody. But Bitcoin isn't in that business anymore.
So that's a perfect segue to my next question is, we've talked about cryptocurrencies, and this is a conference about stablecoins, as boring as they are, according to Project Glitch. We're just going to keep that. Sorry, Mike. So is there a way that stablecoins might actually be even worse for your privacy than Bitcoin?
Well, I just want to say that I don't think stablecoins are boring, right? Like, I think stablecoins are the first thing in crypto that is actually the thing that is going to make crypto relevant. Like, I think everything we've been doing up until now has been like a big pen test. And I think the stablecoin stuff, I'm not sure I'm totally confident in this because it's been a few years.
Pen test is penetration testing.
Yeah,
that's like
sorry. It's
hardening
like,
the infrastructure on something that's maybe less important.
Yeah, we played with these tokens and it was kind of interesting and like it showed that they don't break down. But then stablecoins came along and stablecoins have a lot of applications. And so the question is, what is crypto going to look like in 10 years? And I still think that, it's going to look exactly like the banking system today, except all the guts of the banking system are going to be gone and it's going to be replaced with some version of crypto using stablecoins. I don't think that's a huge bet anymore, but I think that's probably what's going to happen. But that wasn't what you were asking. I just wanted to say that.
No, that was very helpful interjection before we skip to my more cynical question, which is, are stablecoins worse for privacy than Bitcoin?
Not necessarily. They're worse because people demand they be less private, but the technology itself is pretty neutral for privacy.
But I think the point you're getting at is maybe the use cases are more privacy sensitive, right? So the problem with Bitcoin is it's Twitter for your bank account, but realistically, if you don't use it to buy anything and there's nothing up there, it's not the easiest thing for people to figure out who you are. Unless you're a high net worth individual and had people breaking into your house, which apparently happened over the past week. It's actually quite awful. But for stablecoins, the entire idea is you're supposed to use these things to buy stuff. And then that means there's a lot more rich tapestry of data on chain that can bite you in a bunch of different ways.
You get this like mosaic, like he bought this at this little boutique grocery store, he went to a bookstore, he rented a car, all these sorts of things that the FBI would probably want to know about some people, but they probably shouldn't know about everyone.
I'm not worried about the FBI. Like, I'm worried about like giving somebody my crypto address at a store. Like, do you really want to do that if you have a whole bunch of money in your crypto account? That's a very scary, dangerous thing to do.
So you didn't take the bait in the way I expected, though I think this is an excellent point, that people are assuming stablecoins are going to be used for retail payments, which is particularly sensitive as far as personal privacy, and I think we would grant people deserve privacy over some of their retail payments at least, maybe all of them. My bait was stablecoins also have centralized issuers, unlike Bitcoin and Zcash, which had no centralized issuer, and in the United States at least, and globally because of the Financial Action Task Force, the international regulator, anybody who's got a centralized issuer, also that person has obligations to do AML KYC. So to me, you're combining the privacy intrusive aspects of the traditional banking sector, i.e. give us all of your personal documents to prove that you're the person that we think you are. We'll keep them on hand and give them to the government whenever they ask for them, maybe with due process. And the privacy violations of the permissionless blockchain world, which is, and also all of your transactions will be on a globally visible public ledger. And the marriage of those two things is kind of like, that's where we really get into Orwellian panopticon. Or maybe you disagree though, because I think a point that you make when you describe Bitcoin as Twitter for your bank account is once you have big data, once you have chain analysis technologies, you effectively, even if it's a pseudonym, even if it's an anonymous, you can't easily match a real ID to that account and then uncover everything.
I guess I would just say that stablecoins are the thing that actually makes crypto useful, right? Like you can actually do transactions, you can do things with stablecoins. And like crypto has survived not having privacy because nobody uses crypto. And that's great. Like that's a great protection. But like stablecoins in theory are a thing that could make crypto useful for actual applications. And the minute you do that, you have to confront the fact that you're running around putting all your data on a blockchain, which is totally infeasible for any real world use cases other than like DeFi and trading. It's not even very good for DeFi, right? Because we're constantly seeing like pre-information about trades. So I'm trying to tackle your point here, but.
No, I get it.
I mean, I think the other point is like you're saying it's an Orwellian thing. It's not even Orwellian. It could be just accidental. So there's a great quote that I think I'm allowed to attribute to, quote, an executive at a large bank, which is nobody wants to know their customer's customer. And it's not a requirement. The reason is because like everything is like 1 or 2 hops away from something that might be like weird. Like you paid your nanny paid her parents invested in a weird illegal lottery. And if all of this stuff is on chain, there's just a weird risk with all the AI surveillance we have that like 3 false positives later, your account gets frozen. And nobody, even as I understand it, regulators really wants that. But everyone kind of realizes that if you put everything on chain and it's all just a transaction graph for everyone to look at, that is precisely what will happen. Again, despite the fact that nobody wants it.
And it's interesting because this is actually, so people have talked about this because it's become abundantly clear with permissionless cryptocurrencies, with public ledgers, that once you start doing the blockchain analysis and you start doing it in the important context of something like sanctions compliance, your risk calibration becomes highly relevant, probably faster than traditional finance, right? Because if you start looking at, say, the Ethereum blockchain and you ask yourself, how many hops am I, what's my degrees of Kevin Bacon to Kim Jong-un? Is it degrees of Kevin Bacon?
It is now.
I just broke my brain by comparing Kim Jong-un to Kevin Bacon, but you rapidly discover that almost every Ethereum address is like only 2 or 3 hops away from North Korea. And if your sanctioning screening algorithm is block everything that comes from 1 or 2 hops away from Kim Jong-un, now you just block everything, right?
What did they say about New York City, which is like you're never more than 4 feet away from a rat or something? Like if you take away the walls.
If you take,
right?
But people are happy that there are walls because they don't want to know that they're always surrounded by rats. Right. And so that's basically how the global financial system still has throughput today, is they don't know that they're surrounded by rats all the time.
So the really, really dense, I don't know, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought up rats, but the really dense like observation, like the observation, like when I first realized stablecoins are useful, is to think about the way like the banking industry works. It has 2 functions, right? To hold a bunch of cash and then also to maintain this kind of like ledger functionality where we keep track of who owns it and move it between the banks. And like we've done a terrible job at actually doing the moving between the banks part. That turns out to be kind of hard. But if you just kind of sweep away that ledger functionality and give it off to a blockchain, everything gets so much simpler, but then it exposes all of this painful stuff where it turns out, like imagine in the olden days, buildings were built out of brick and then we figured out how to use drywall and it's all kind of thin walls. Once you turn the walls, get rid of the walls entirely, you realize that like you're surrounded by a whole bunch of other people and you don't want to be.
And you think, like, how did I get in this situation where I'm showering in a glass room?
Right.
Who wanted this?
Yes.
Nobody wants that.
But we could rebuild the walls. I mean, we could do something like that.
So let's talk about rebuilding the walls. The title of this panel is How Private Can a Stablecoin Be? So I guess just the naive technical question to both of you, how private can a stablecoin be?
The answer is you can build a completely private stablecoin where all the transactions on chain reveal literally nothing. There's a risk of the issuer then freezing all of the money or being forced to, but you can make something completely private. The question is then, well, what are the other trade-offs you want to make there?
So what we're postulating there is basically like a Zcash, but instead of the issuance of the underlying token being some automatic function based on proof of work or whatever, it's somebody like Circle, just in a room, ticking off new units whenever somebody brings them dollars. And transaction by transaction on the blockchain, there's nothing, just like there's nothing in Zcash, right? That sounds good. We should build that, right?
I mean, we can do it. Like it's done. It's been done. There are privacy preserving stablecoins out there and not hugely used, but the technology is out there. So you're looking at me with a look. So
There's a but here, though, isn't there?
Well, there's not necessarily but. So you have a problem, right? Which is that the entire regulatory framework for stablecoins depends on visibility of transactions. And it's a terrible terrible regulatory framework. It's visibility of transactions sent to, the Chainalysis, TRM lab companies to look for bad things. And then some kind of law enforcement says we freeze this, and there's a freeze list where you can freeze wallets. And it's amazing to me that that works, that people are allowing that to be a system that is out there, but it's been done. And like the magic of crypto is you can just do things. So somebody did that and like got a regulator to say it was okay, and now it's the standard. But you can't do any of that in a privacy preserved.
Well, it's interesting that you say it's the standard, and this is where I'm going to quibble as an annoying lawyer facing to academic cryptographers. But I mean, the Bank Secrecy Act just says that you need to know your customers, and arguably your customers are just the people who come and bring you $1 and ask for an anonymous stable coin. And so you should be able to just ID that guy and then give him that thing, and then he can do whatever he wants with it.
I love your legal theory. Like, good theory.
It's the law. It's the Bank Secrecy Act. There isn't something in the Bank Secrecy Act that Congress passed into law that says that you have to have a company called Chainalysis or TRM monitor the transactions in between. Of course not. Didn't exist when the Bank Secrecy Act was written.
Is there any part of this law that says we can have stable coins in the first place?
No, but in an Anglo-Saxon legal theory, anything that is not explicitly prohibited is permitted. That's a good basis of an open society.
I like the theory.
All right, I'm taking you into like civil liberties legal land, and I should probably get us back into cryptography. Is there something better, though, than the current regulatory model? And I'm cutting the current regulatory model short shrift because, yes, that is what we sort of evolved into. The Bank Secrecy Act doesn't specifically call for these transaction monitoring services, but that's what compliance has evolved into, in that you're not just going to be able to ID the person you're issuing or redeeming from. You're going to have some ability to freeze things on chain, because we're watching it in real time as your stablecoins are moving to an address controlled by North Korea. So surely you must be able to do something about it, right? So can we do something about it while still having some privacy for retail users? Or can we, how do we square this circle? It seems very difficult, actually.
Well, I mean, first, let's talk about what might be the worst thing that is already happening. So the thing Matt and I did after we designed Zcash is wrote an academic paper on how to do what's called privacy-preserving smart contracts. This is now a thing that's deployed in a couple of different cryptocurrencies, Aleo, Aztec, a couple of others. And what this lets you do is write various rules that govern your transactions. You can program them however you want, and you can make anybody follow those rules even though it's private. So like a bad actor, they're malicious, they still have to follow the same procedures. So you can build a privacy-preserving stablecoin which has some rules in it. For example, you can build one where every time you do a transaction, you have to encrypt the from, to, and the amount and send it to, say, TRM or Chainalysis or whoever you want, the Eye of Sauron. And in fact, that is the system that everybody is now building for private stablecoins. It's called a view key, and that is what we're getting now. And the reason I said that might be worse is in a public blockchain, you ought to know it's Twitter for your bank account. In a privacy-preserving blockchain with a view key, well, you get some privacy until the infrastructure that's doing the analysis gets hacked, right? The thing that will happen if you know, we have cyber actors that break into things. So like if you've heard of Salt Typhoon, that was someone who got into the US phone infrastructure. If anyone here had their data in the OPM hack, right, that was somebody who got into the US database of security clearance processes. And then they also, by the way, went and stole the Experian credit reporting database to combine those two things to get people. So this data will get out. So that's the worst thing we're building now, which is view keys that have data.
So this is sort of the difference between we live in a world where all the walls have turned to glass and we're surrounded by rats all the time, versus we live in a world that looks like it's very opaque, and then one day we all wake up and actually we're surrounded, like everything's suddenly glass and we weren't even prepared for it because you get key compromise, right? And I feel like this is something that both of you probably have a long history of thinking about, because this is something we talked about back in the old days of the encryption debate over strong encryption. That like, should governments allow strong encryption to continue, or should developers of these new technologies be forced to implement backdoors, use Clipper chips, have key escrow, things like this, right?
Yeah, I have a lot of trouble with that because I feel very strongly about the encryption debate that we should be able to speak privately, and that's fine. And meanwhile, I've worked on systems where we have these kind of view keys. I don't have a great answer for that. I mean, I think the simplest thing to say is that right now the choice in the cryptocurrency world and the financial world is if you don't have some kind of visibility And believe me, I can tell you stories. Like I spent the last several years trying to do a startup around private cryptocurrency compliance. And the question that every single conversation began with was, what are the policies you want? We can do anything. Just tell us, to compliance person after compliance person, just tell us what the policy is. We'll just implement that. And they would say, I have no idea. You tell us. And so like we kind of iterated our way to just, like, look, we'll give you visibility into a part of the transactions on just this one asset. And at least that looks like something that you know how to deal with. And that's the only way that this has been able to work. But to answer your question, I don't like it.
Yeah, although I want to give you credit because I think I agree that there is something different between this conversation and the strong encryption and key escrow conversation. Because in that world, we're talking about base level research, not implementation. We're talking about can you even publish a research paper on how to make some text secret, how to turn it into ciphertext in a way that can't be broken without the actual key. Here we're talking about applications of cryptography for different use cases, and maybe we can find ways to take some of strong encryption to make certain aspects of the system more robust, but still have safety valves maybe. And we're not talking about removing a whole category of technologies for privacy. We're talking about selectively implementing disclosure and things into things. So I think that's fair. And this brings me to something that I was hoping you might get to. We jumped right to using selective disclosure and Zcash style privacy. I think a lot of people who are maybe more from the stablecoin space and not the privacy space, or from less of a technological background, might have a simpler idea of how you make stablecoins private, which is just have a centralized institution, have a data security perimeter, and just have transactions within that perimeter. You've seen systems like this. There are systems that people talk about like this, right?
You're talking about privacy pools, for example, or sorry, Ken? I see. Yeah, well, another way to do this is you do this thing where you say, look, there is it's more or less the same thing, right? You say there is a trusted bank, and the bank sees all your transactions, and maybe the bank is just a computer. Maybe it's something like Canton where you have multiple computers on a kind of permissioned blockchain, and each one is a fiefdom, and they see a fraction of the transactions. That's a way to go. It's just, okay, so from my perspective as a technologist, I think that's kind of boring, but it's not bad. But at the end of the day, the question we're asking is not related to how you run the blockchain. That's not the interesting question. We're just asking, tell me who to give access to. Tell me the rules, and I will implement them on any public blockchain with all sorts of powerful zero knowledge capabilities. But I don't know what the rules you want are.
I think that sort of misses it. So the reason we're all interested in blockchains is because, well, people are interested in them, but there are two driving things. One of them is an ideological thing of it should be decentralized and nobody should control it. And you're presumably dimly aware of that. You may not agree with it. You may not care about the people who talk about that. But the other one is even for a business, if you're building on some platform, you don't want to build on somebody else's platform, right? You want to build on a thing that they're not going to change the terms of the deal out from under you. And the only way to do that is to have something which is vaguely decentralized, meaning a bunch of different parties run it. And this means that new parties have to be able to join easily. This is a thing that's called permissionlessness. And the problem there is if new parties can join, if it's a new business, if PayPal can join, if Visa, if some new startup that's doing payments can join, then that means they get to see the entire structure of the data because you want them to be able to transfer their assets, right? And other people's assets. And so then you get back to this privacy problem because if anybody can join, anybody can see it. So there's fundamentally two versions of this for privacy. One of them is we don't actually want a blockchain. We just want an Oracle database for a bank with better technology. That's actually totally good. But that's not quite the same thing that's driving interest in blockchains. We have to deal with the fact that anybody can run and participate in it because it's like the internet where anyone can spin up a website, but then anybody can see the data. That's this switch.
Well, and I think that's a really important distinction and one that I was hoping to uncover in this discussion, because I think as we trend towards re-centralizing power over things like privacy, i.e., you'll have privacy, but at the end of the day, it's dependent on somebody's ability to keep a view key safe or some other centralized institution, we start creeping back towards just reinventing the existing financial system. And perhaps an extreme version of that is a permissioned blockchain that's run by a couple of large financial institutions. And now I think you're right. The business question is, why would I, if I'm the issuer of a security, because I want to do tokenized securities, why would I issue my securities on the chain that is the New York Stock Exchange centralized chain, when I'm basically just going to be doing all the things I would have had to do to get my security issued in the old world? Where are the efficiencies, and are there going to be anti-competitive issues? Versus, can I implement, using smart contract rules, some controls, like only allowing this to travel to an accredited investor, which is a privacy and identity like whitelist or blacklist tool, but on a chain that is not owned by one giant entity whose interests might not align with mine as a participant in the economy, because they want market share, they want to dominate.
Yeah, I mean, I what you just said. So I used to work for AT&T Labs, and one of our big businesses at AT&T was leased lines, right? We would sell you a line for a vast amount of money per month, and your business could talk to like its satellite office through this leased line.
The telephone lines.
Telephone,
long
data
ago.
lines, like, for something that's like your laptop would laugh at, you would pay $1,000 a month. And over the time that I worked there, this was about 1999, that entire business collapsed and got replaced with the internet. And many people at the time were saying, why would you want to use the internet to do this? This is so risky. There are security problems. There are all these issues. What really happened was everyone just deployed VPNs. If you're running a business with multiple sites, you just encrypt your data and you use the internet. And meanwhile, the internet allows us to do so many more things. Nobody would ever go back to that kind of proprietary model. So I know there are people from Canton here. I'm not trying to insult anyone, but I think that model has limitations and isn't flexible. If what you need is just to control who has access to things, we have technology to do that without limiting the way the entire architecture of the system works.
Okay, so we have that technology. That technology is what? Some combination of view keys, of transaction limits. What is in the realm of possibility for privacy that we still think would be sufficiently compliant or sufficiently, have sufficient safety valves that you think regulators would be comfortable with it?
Oh, regulators.
Well, regulators at the end of the day are why we don't have the fully anonymous ones, right? That's what we were just talking about earlier.
See, the problem here is when you say things like regulators are okay with it, are we asking the regulators before we do it? Or are we doing it and then seeing if the regulators arrest us? Because that seems to be the way that crypto has kind of thought about these things.
I mean, both have happened, right? Like Libra said they'll not launch until they get permission from everybody on Senate Banking and House Financial Services, and lo and behold, they didn't launch. And then Tornado Cash did, and
So I will say this. I think that view key-based systems with different levels of granularity on the view, like does Circle see everything that you see across all assets? Do they see a small piece? Do they see something like that? There are a lot of options there. That is a solution that will work and can work, and I think that's already out there. The harder stuff, which Ian is about to talk to, I am somewhat skeptical of, and that's all I'll say.
Yeah, so the alternative, and we were literally having this conversation at launch of could you get anyone to do this, is you can build these sort of identity-based solutions where you like verify who you are, and we do risk scoring and reputation, and we can do freezing of transactions. And again, these are programmable systems. You can come up with pretty much any policy, risk scoring metric, behaviors you want and implement it. There are two questions. Three. One, what are those policies? Because I'm a cryptographer, I don't actually know what the ins and outs of money laundering stuff are. And when I want to, I go bother Mike Mosier and get him to tell me things. And then second, are they effective? And then third, will regulators let you try them for a while? And so this is the question of, can we get an experimental place to try these things? So we have really good techniques for identity, for reputation that might work. They might not. And we would like to live in a world where those exist and are what we use, because the alternative, if you do view keys, is on a long enough timeline, that view key is going to be exposed, all the data is going to end up in the hands of some country we don't like, and we're going to be back to you getting a notice from OPM saying, hey, please subscribe to identity monitoring services because somebody has all your security clearance data.
And a way I think about this, to sort of bring it back to something that maybe will make sense to regulators, to the extent there are regulators listening, and this is nothing about the genius rulemaking, so don't worry. Do we have a third party who we're going to give sort of a technological capability to do risk monitoring, and that's the person like an issuer or a chain analysis that will hold a view key, and just assume that they're going to have the interests of the retail users in mind alongside the interests of law enforcement and strike that balance? Or can we have the regulator who cares about illicit finance come up with what the risk balance should be, articulated in a way that can be at least partially encoded in a rule set rather than the discretion of an individual, and then build the technological systems that would automatically execute some of those rules. For example, you might have a digital passport on your phone, which is actually somewhat robust now, that could create a zero-knowledge proof that shows that you're not on the OFAC list, and that plus 3 other factors, like you've used your phone recently and you have a bank account where you've been ID'd, could be enough for a smart contract to do the compliance rather than Circle, Chainalysis, or some company we have to trust. But to get there, we would need, as Matt has been saying throughout this panel, to know exactly what the balance should be, and so we can write the rules to do it so that it's not human beings doing it. And that's...
I spent 5 years trying to get somebody to tell me that was okay. And I'm handing the baton on to you, Peter, to try to find someone else to tell you it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I got to be honest. My answer to Matt when he said nobody was going to do any of the more advanced stuff was, okay, well, the view key stuff is rolling out. That's actually just happening, right? Aleo has a deployed stablecoin with a view key in it. We're going to find out in short order exactly the predictable things that can go wrong on those. And then there may be more demand to do alternative things. But this is going to be a matter of probably doing it after the fact, unfortunately.
So if it's interesting to you how we might be able to move forward and build some of these things into transparent rules that can be automatically executed rather than continuing to rely on centralized entities to do it for you, keep in touch with Coin Center and Ian and Matt and I. Ian and I just published a paper called Tear Down This Walled Garden about digital identity and American ideals. And we're all starting to have a conversation through something we call the John Hancock Project about how we can actually articulate some of those rule sets in a way that could be instituted in a public, rule-based way rather than just enshrining new intermediaries to do the work. So thank you, Ian and Matt, for hopefully an enlightening and not boring discussion about fancy privacy.
Thank you.